The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Beth, it's that time of year again, October, the spooky season, my favorite time of the year.
Mine too, because the weather is starting to feel like fall and we have all the pumpkins out in the patches around here and the apples. And then there's all the spooky stuff, which we love. So yeah, October is arguably one of the best months of the year.
That it is, Beth. And you know what? I just can't get enough of Halloween. You know, I started decorating in August, as you know, because I started pulling all the skeletons literally out of the closet. And they're scattered all throughout the house, doing all kinds of unusual things.
Well, you make them do unusual things.
You know what I mean? We dress them up differently every year for Halloween.
We do? Or?
Well, yes, I do.
Okay.
I just like dressing them up differently every year. And they're not out for just Halloween a lot of times. I mean, we have some that stay up all year round, and we dress them up for Christmas and other holidays.
They are part of our decor, for sure. They're a permanent display in our house.
Well, now that the kids are mostly gone, well, you know, it's like family that you don't have to feed.
Yeah, that's not creepy at all. This one's Sue, and this one's Anne, and this one's Charlie.
Well, I haven't gone as far as naming them all yet.
Well, that's true.
Well, that's something we should work on.
This we stuff again. Although I should probably be a part of it. I'll come home from work one day and you'll be like, you must now refer to this one as... I don't know.
Well, you know, we even have some pets. We got a couple cat ones and...
We do. We have a werewolf skeleton.
Yeah. We do have quite a bit.
We do.
And I don't think I'm the only one that's doing it. I know there's a lot of people out there, our listeners, that probably do the same thing as I do.
I would think so. Maybe there's one or two.
Yeah, at least.
Keep telling yourself that.
Well, you know how it goes. Anyways, with all that said, for tonight's episode, we thought we'd cover 2 haunted places. So, Beth, why don't you start us off tonight?
All right. Well, to start, Picton, Ontario seems like a pretty intriguing place. We could start with an unusual tombstone that garnered a bit of national and worldwide attention when it was featured in an episode of Ripley's Believe It or Not TV show in the 1960s. Do you remember that show?
Yeah, and I remember it from the 1960s.
Well, I know I didn't watch it in the 60s, but I do remember watching it. Somehow it must have been... they must have restarted it, or it was...
Well, there were reruns.
There were.
Mm-hmm.
So this gravestone, which can be found in Picton's St. Mary Magdalene Churchyard, reads, William Pierce died February 31st, 1860. An article in the Toronto Telegram back in 1936 speculated about the fanciful date. Was it just the work of an absent-minded stonecutter? Did William Pierce have a great sense of humor? Or did the imaginary date have some sort of significance? The article didn't say, and to this day, no one really knows. So I was curious if the St. Mary Magdalene churchyard is believed to be haunted. Is William Pierce at rest under a tombstone that has his date of death so obviously wrong? But out of the handful of haunted places in Picton, the churchyard was not one of them. But the Regent Theatre certainly is. And there's something about old theaters, especially the grand ones, that seem like a natural place for ghosts to hang out. It's dark. The ambient light casts all kinds of shadows. There's those rows and rows of empty seats, which seem to hold the essence of 1,000 theater-goers who sat there before. There's all the emotions that fill a theater during any performance or movie, from the actors portraying the lives we don't have to the audience members who may be moved to tears or anger or even boredom. The Regent Theatre was one of those grand theaters, the kind that wanted to make going to the movies a special experience, when going to a movie was a big deal. And later, the Regent Theatre was also a magnificent venue for stage shows, from vaudeville to opera to ballet. And so it's understandable that those who worked there, the ticket sellers, projectionists, wardrobe assistants, ushers, they loved their theater and just may have chosen to stay there in the afterlife. Yes, they might place their hand on your shoulder only to disappear the second you turn around. They might lean out of the darkness and into the light, casting a full-body shadow, giving you a little scare. They might even get a little angry and yell at you to get out. But they have their reasons. It's their theater. Picton was named after Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton, who died in the Battle of Waterloo. The town itself sits on the shores of Lake Ontario in Prince Edward County, and due to its location and similarities to Great Britain's landscape, it was chosen to be the site for a Royal Air Force bombing and gunnery school. After World War II, the school was renamed Camp Picton, and it became a Canadian Army base. After the base closed in 1969, the remaining buildings were used for all kinds of things, including TV and movie locations. But back in 1913, a man named George Cook wasn't interested in making movies. He was interested in showing them. He and his wife Ellen bought a former hotel on Main Street, hired architects Warren and Page, and renovations began on Cook's premier movie theater. Cook had the former hotel entryway widened, and he paid special attention to the fairly new fire codes. When it opened in 1918, the Regent Theatre had 500 seats, which is kind of odd for a town that, even in 2016, only had a population of 4,700 people. But Cook was a visionary, and he wanted Picton to have the grandest of all movie houses. They showed silent films, of course, charging patrons 25 cents to watch Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle on screen. The Regent was an immensely popular theater. But then the Spanish flu pandemic took its toll. 50,000 Canadian citizens died, and in an attempt to stop the spread of contagion, the Canadian government ordered the shutdown of public meeting places. The Regent Theatre was forced to close its doors. But just a few years later, when the Spanish flu had thankfully run its course and bars and billiard halls were allowed to reopen, the Regent Theatre reopened too in 1922 with a completely new look. Cook had renovated once again, and the new Regent Theatre was even more majestic. If the brand new glowing marquee on the front of the building didn't draw people in, then the luxuries inside certainly would. It now had a stage as large as the Royal Alexandra Theatre in Toronto, 10 crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, an orchestra pit, dressing rooms under the stage, and enough seating for over 1,000 people. The new Regent Theatre was now an opera house that catered to vaudeville shows, which were incredibly popular. But it also doubled as a movie theater that supplied the latest in film, talkies. People came from all over the country to either perform there or sit in the audience. The Regent Theatre was a spectacular success. Upon George Cook's death, his daughter Louise inherited the theater, which she owned and operated until she sold it to the Regent Theatre Foundation in 1994. Today, Picton's landmark theater still screens current films, and it hosts live musical performances as well. They also live stream opera performances and ballets. The foundation works tirelessly to keep the Regent looking exactly as it did in 1922. And as a way to fundraise, they recently held a contest that awarded the winner with haunting rights.
That's awesome.
It's so cool. Ernie Hudson, who was one of the original Ghostbusters in the movies, he even recorded a video asking people to enter the contest. The winner, Picton native Ryan Aldred, was granted, quote, the perpetual and eternal right to haunt the Regent Theatre as a ghost.
Well, if you're going to come back as a ghost and you're going to haunt someplace, a theater is the perfect place to do it.
Absolutely. And it was a very clever contest. But from several accounts, it sounds like Aldred will have to share his afterlife haunting with a few other ghosts. And they may not get along if he ventures into places that the current ghosts consider their territory. The current operations supervisor of the theater, Colleen Johnson, has experienced several evenings when she's left the fire door open as she's shutting things down for the night because she feels like she's not alone. Other staff members have reported that when they've gone through and systematically shut off all the lights, they often find that the lights in the second-story loft have somehow turned back on just as they are about to leave. Although many of the volunteers and staff at the Regent believe that it's Louise Cook who still walks through the busy theater and could be the cause for some of these odd experiences, it could also be a former projectionist, janitor, or even George Cook, who seem to figure into the majority of ghostly encounters that people can't explain. According to an excellent 2019 article published by the people of PEC, a janitor who was highly skeptical of all the ghost talk around the theater was up in the second-story loft running a spotlight. He claimed he felt an unmistakable tap on his shoulder, and when he managed to turn around in the narrow area, expecting to see someone, there wasn't anyone there. There wasn't anywhere for a person to leave from that he wouldn't have been able to see, so he found himself understandably unnerved. Back in 2016, the father of one of the performers went up to the loft for a bird's-eye view of a play about Elvis. As he stood watching the show, he too felt a very strong tap on his shoulder. Colleen herself was up in the loft, which was where the former projection booth used to be, and it was one evening during a ballet performance. Apparently, George Cook was a stickler about forbidding anyone to be up in that area during live shows because he felt that it distracted the performers. As Colleen walked from one end of the loft to the other, she suddenly heard a very loud, disembodied male voice order her to get out. But the creepiest of all the loft stories is when a projectionist went up to the loft with a cash box during a show. He had brought it up there for safekeeping during the performance. Colleen was literally watching him on a security camera in real time as he placed the cash box on a table and stepped away from it. She said the cash box flew off the table and landed on the floor a good 3 feet away. There was no way the projectionist had snagged it on something. My speculation, personally, is that it could be George Cook and that he still has some pretty specific ideas of how things should be done. If he didn't want people up there during performances, he's letting them know. Patrons have even remarked to staff that they've seen shadow people in the lobby that seem to disappear through closed doors. Is it just a coincidence that these closed doors used to be former offices or even the former cloakroom? Lastly, from the People of PEC article, they shared the account of an employee named Fred. One of Fred's jobs was to lower and clean the chandeliers, which he had done numerous times. The chandelier included a locking mechanism so that it couldn't budge while it was being cleaned. One time, as Fred was raising the chandelier slowly back up, the thick rope actually broke, and the chandelier literally came down on top of him. When they examined the rope, it showed no signs of fraying. They couldn't explain at all why or how it had broken the way that it had. Does George Cook and his daughter Louise still haunt their theater? Is there a former projectionist or janitor still there as well? Is it a stretch to think that if they cared greatly about their beautiful theater, that they might still be there, continuing to show great care for it in the afterlife? I don't think so. And, like I said at the top of my story, I think Picton, Ontario sounds pretty intriguing. They seem to celebrate their haunted locations and their history, which, to us, is a pretty perfect combination. Hey, did you know? Michael Myers from the classic American horror film Halloween is one of the most recognizable horror villains of all time. But have you ever noticed that he looks a little too familiar? That may be because the mask worn by the actor portraying Myers was simply a $2 Star Trek Captain Kirk mask that the costume department spray painted white. They enlarged the eye holes to make Myers even creepier. Why did they use a Captain Kirk mask? Because the budget for Halloween was so low, it was the best option they could afford. Who'da thunk it? So where are you bringing us this evening?
Well, I thought it'd be fitting to take everyone on a journey to a haunted castle. But not just any castle. This one is home to not just one ghost, but 7. And many people believe that there's a portal inside its walls. But even more strange, this castle isn't in Europe like some of the other ones we've talked about. It's in Vermont, Proctor, Vermont to be exact, which was originally part of Rutland, Vermont, until it became a chartered town in 1886. It was named for Redfield Proctor, president of the Vermont Marble Company. That whole area is often referred to as the marble capital of the United States. And although Proctor's population is small, just under 1,800 people in 2020, the town has raised 5 Vermont governors. But the formidable Wilson Castle, with its red brick facade and 2 turrets, wasn't built by a Proctor. It was built by a physician named John Johnson for his wife in 1885. You see, Dr. Johnson had met Sarah Robbins while he was studying medicine in England, and in order to impress his wealthy aristocratic bride, he brought her to his home in Vermont and immediately began building a castle for her on his 115 acres of land. It took almost 8 years to plan and build the elaborate red brick and marble home, which was a mix of Dutch Neo-Renaissance, Scotch Baronial, Queen Anne, and Romanesque Revival architecture. Now, if that sounds like a pretty eclectic mix, I think you'd be right. Johnson hired 2 English architects to make his vision a reality, which included 19 proscenium arches, 84 stained glass windows, 2 turrets, a parapet, and a balcony. If you want to be technical, it's the parapet that qualifies the Wilson Castle as a castle. So, in case you're like me and you didn't know what a parapet is, it's a dwarf wall, or heavy railing around the edge of a roof, balcony, terrace, or stairway, designed either to prevent those behind it from falling over or to shelter them from attack from the outside. When it was finished, the castle's interior was divided into 32 rooms, including an art gallery, billiards room, and servant quarters. There are 13 fireplaces, some done in bronze, and, of course, some done in marble. So, heading back outside of the castle, there were 18 additional outbuildings, which included a orangery, which is a fancy word for a large greenhouse designed to grow orange trees as well as other fruit trees, and an apiary, which is a bee house. The aviary, which is in the shape of a very large bird cage, contains such exotic birds as peacocks, eagles, and pheasants, although those might have been added on later with a different owner. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, how a Vermont country doctor could afford to build a place like that, which happened to cost a whopping $1.3 million. That's right, $1.3 million in 1885, which would be about $33 million in today's money. So, how did he do it? Well, simple. He used his wife's money.
Aha!
Now, to be honest with everyone, I couldn't find a lot of information about the Johnsons, and there seems to be a lot of speculation of just what exactly went wrong with their marriage. Some people speculate that Dr. Johnson's spending habits didn't sit very well with Sarah's family, and that they began encouraging her to leave Dr. Johnson. Or perhaps Sarah eventually began to believe that he hadn't married her for love, and he had just married her for her money. And after the death of one of their 2 infant children from viral meningitis, Sarah Johnson moved out of the castle and back to England. Some sources say that she only lived in the castle for 3 years, although others say it was closer to 7. Regardless, once she left and passed away, Dr. Johnson couldn't afford the upkeep or the taxes on his castle anymore. Some sources say that Dr. Johnson was forced to auction off many of their belongings, and locals began calling the castle Johnson's Folly. Within a short period of time, Dr. Johnson had no choice but to sell his home. Other versions of the Johnsons' unknown history say that Sarah's parents cut off their cash flow, and it was Dr. Johnson who left her, and she ended up staying in the castle until the early 1900s until she had to sell it off. But regardless of how it all happened, the ownership of the property changed 16 times and was briefly used as a beauty school until 1939, when it was purchased by a radio engineer named Herbert Lee Wilson. This is where Wilson Castle gets its name from, since descendants of the Wilson family have owned the property ever since. According to the official Wilson Castle website, Colonel Wilson was a pioneer in the radio industry, and he built radio stations all over the world, including the one in the castle stable. And that little detail came from Atlas Obscura.
That's pretty cool that he built one in his own stable. I mean, of course he would if he was a pioneer of the radio industry.
I know. I would have thought that he'd probably build it right out of it, in his house. But a stable would be pretty cool.
And maybe he wanted some alone time out there.
Just him and his horses.
Maybe.
He created radio station WSYB in Rutland, Vermont, which had the first directional antenna in the entire state. He also did some engineering for WCAX, the Channel 3 television station in Burlington. But back in 1939, he bought the castle as a summer home for his family. In 1941, Wilson joined the Army and rose to the rank of colonel before returning to Proctor in the 1950s. Due to his travels in the Army, Wilson Castle is full of both Far Eastern and European antiques, including Chinese scrolls, Oriental carpets, and several statues. The woodwork in each room is completely different. I don't know if it was originally that way when Dr. Johnson built the house or whether Colonel Wilson added the woodwork, but according to Atlas Obscura, the different woodwork in each room matches the wood of the specific furniture inside it. The ceilings were also once covered in elaborate and ornate murals. Sadly today, though, many of them are unfortunately water damaged, but a few are still in good condition. And apparently, there were quite a few secret compartments and an entire secret passageway in the castle. Colonel Wilson used the hidden compartments to hide valuables, and some of these valuables have been found in recent years. The secret passageway that was rumored to absolutely exist still hasn't been found to this day. But the secret compartments and alleged secret passageway may have been used for an entirely different reason. There is some speculation that Colonel Wilson created the secret passageway as a way to get people to stop saying his castle was haunted. There is some speculation also that he created the rumor himself. If that truly was his intention, it didn't really work, because to this day, people are still saying that the castle is haunted, including the current caretakers of the castle. The current caretakers of the castle, Andy Propes and Denise Devine, happen to believe that the castle is indeed haunted. And what's pretty cool about that is Miss Devine is a direct descendant of Colonel Wilson. Again, according to the official Wilson Castle website, there are way too many reports of the paranormal to keep up with them all. Their website states that they do believe that the second floor contains a portal and a vortex. And that might not be hard to believe when you consider all the numerous stories of disembodied voices and shadow people that are heard and seen there. I mean, the history of the castle is so freaking cool, and you have to know about the history in order to understand just who may have stuck around in the afterlife. First, there is one ghost who may be directly tied to a death in the castle. Allegedly, a maintenance man was cleaning a banister when he suffered a heart attack and passed away. Staff members at the castle affectionately call his specter Dickie, and they say that they've seen him quite often. The Wilson Castle website mentions that there were various mysterious disappearances tied to the castle, and I would speculate that the fates of both Sarah and Dr. Johnson fit that category. Adding to the mystery, various visiting paranormal investigators have caught EVPs that claim bodies are buried in the basement. Now, I'm not saying that either Mrs. Johnson or Dr. Johnson are buried in the basement, but castle staff do feel that some of the strange experiences that they've had, like feeling watched and hearing disembodied voices, might be tied to potential buried bodies beneath their feet. Other paranormal groups have caught EVPs that they believe say things like strangulation or suffocation, and a man's voice saying, "She doesn't love me." The castle does have plans to excavate the basement at some point in the future.
I'd be really interested to know what they find.
So wouldn't I. But I don't know why they want to tear up that basement. They should just bring in ground-penetrating radar, and they could not have to disturb the castle floor at all.
That's true. I wonder how expensive that is, though.
I don't know, but if you can afford a castle,
Well, yeah, that's true.
I think you can
True.
afford to bring in ground-penetrating radar.
Yeah.
Now, it's also believed that one of Colonel Wilson's belongings may be a bona fide haunted object. There are numerous reports that a specific music box that once belonged to him often plays by itself. Staff and guests will hear faint music playing, and when they finally find the source, it's the music box. Which is kind of ironic, considering Colonel Wilson didn't like the rumors about his home being haunted. Perhaps Colonel Wilson did start the rumor about the secret passageway, as a way to explain the disembodied voices and objects that seem to move on their own. He apparently invited a priest to come to the castle and bless it once a year in the spring. Now, was that because he may have secretly had his own unexplained experiences? Or was it simply something he did as a yearly religious observance? No one seems to have a clue as to why he did it. These days, it seems as though the second and third floors of the castle are the most haunted. Many paranormal investigators have brought trigger objects with them, like light-up cat balls and small toys, which seem to catch the attention of a young child. When they aren't using any toys as trigger objects, some investigators have claimed that the billiard balls on the billiard table have moved on their own when they've asked the spirit of a child to make its presence known. The apparition of a young male child was even caught in a photograph. Andy Probst, who is one of Wilson Castle's caretakers, showed the photo to a Burlington Banner reporter back in July of 2022 while they were there to do an article. Whoever was taking the picture was facing a mirror, and in the reflection standing behind them is a young child. The apparition is so clear that his socks are even reflected by the hardwood floor. But the unidentified child's spirit isn't the only one that shows up in photographs. Wilson family descendants and other staff believe Sarah Johnson haunts her former home and is often caught in pictures. She has appeared in so many random photos that the castle actually has a collection of them in her former bedroom. But she makes herself known in other ways as well. Today, the castle is a popular wedding venue. They also offer daytime historical tours. It's reportedly a common occurrence for wedding guests and visitors to ask about the female figure in black standing in an upper story window, looking down on them. There was one instance when a group of women spent the night in Sarah's room and had an odd experience. They said that they had had a lovely evening, except for the fact that the furnace kept constantly kicking on. They said it was quite warm, and it just kept turning on over and over. They could hear it, and they could certainly feel the hot air coming through the grate in the wall. Andy Probst was the one who informed the women that there wasn't a working furnace in that part of the house.
And we've heard that before, where people staying in places claim that it was unbearably hot and they couldn't figure out why.
Yes.
In a room.
We have.
Yeah.
Yes. Andy says that he has also had a number of his own experiences, and he told the Burlington Banner that he and Divine think that there are 7 spirits who regularly walk the halls of Wilson Castle. But they also believe that there's a portal, and it may exist in a closet on the 2nd floor, allowing the other spirits to visit when they want to. There are a few experiences that Probst shared that sound pretty creepy. One time, he was washing his hands in the bathroom when he looked in the mirror over the sink, and he saw a definite shadow person cross the doorway behind him. He yelled so loudly that a tour in the next room wondered what the hell was going on. He also shared that another shadow person likes to hang out on the 3rd floor. Now, the 3rd floor isn't on the historical tours. It's used mostly as a storage area, but it is open to the nighttime paranormal tours. Andy says that he has spotted a shadow person peeking around a specific wall numerous times, and he doesn't like the vibe up there at all. Now, that might have something to do with the antique wicker coffin that's stored up there when it's not being used for a Halloween prop. One paranormal group decided to have a member of their group get inside it as a trigger object. When they closed the lid, an EVP came through that said, "Let him out." Now, to me, that doesn't sound like a spirit or entity that's evil or even a threatening one. According to the Burlington Banner article, Andy Probst would agree with that assumption. He said that he doesn't feel that there's anything evil in Wilson Castle. Now, I gotta tell you, I haven't been there before, but it certainly does sound like there's something paranormal going on within the walls of the castle.
It definitely does.
Yeah, I mean, there's something going on there. Now, I think it's important to tell everyone that even though we live close to Vermont, we've never heard of the Wilson Castle until the Sasquatch Festival that we went to over the last weekend. While we were at the festival, a very lovely couple from England approached us, and they stated that they had spent the night there before for a paranormal investigation, and they said that it was really cool and that they felt like something there had communicated with them.
It was really neat to talk to them because they were here on vacation and they were going from paranormal place to paranormal place.
Yeah, they were hitting all the hot spots that interested them.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool that they came to the Sasquatch Festival, but it was really cool that they told us about Wilson Castle. Like you said, we had never heard about it before. So we were like, tell us more. What happened? What was it like?
Right. And when you think about going on like paranormal trips, I think about going to Europe, places like that have really old places.
And lots of history that goes back thousands of years.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think about coming to the States to go to, a haunted castle, which is funny because, when I think about doing paranormal investigations in the United States, I'm thinking hotspots like asylums and prisons and orphanages.
Right.
And some haunted houses.
Right. Like the Lizzie Borden house or, the ones that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
So this was off the beaten track and it was in our backyard. So it was really cool to hear about.
And someday we should take the ferry over and check out Wilson Castle.
Yes, and the cemetery with the guy with that we did the episode on where he had a safety coffin and it had the glass.
Oh, that's right.
I want to hit that cemetery too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because usually every fall we make our round of cemeteries.
Yeah.
All over this area. Because we have some fantastic cemeteries around here.
We do. It'll be a day trip. Well, couple day trip if we're going to spend the night in the haunted castle.
Right. Well, with all that said, I think that about wraps it up for this episode, Beth.
I think so. And as always, all you wanderers, if you want to know more about our topics, you can always check our show notes for our sources, where we did all of our research and came up with our information, our stories for you.
That's right. So it's a jumping off point to get you started.
Yes.
You go from there. You might dig up something that we didn't.
Yes, we get your tootsies wet and you can jump into the entire pool of paranormal.
Your tootsies wet. Wow. Join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon.